The moon hangs like a pearl over the Arabian Sea, casting silver threads across waters that barely whisper against the ancient shore. 60 feet beneath this tranquil surface, where sunlight has never touched stone, something extraordinary waits in the silt and shadow. Picture the camera's gentle descent through layers of blue-green twilight, past schools of silver fish that dart like living memories through the depths. The water grows cooler here, heavier with the weight of centuries. And then, emerging from the seafloor like a dream half remembered, the outline of walls appears straight lines too precise for nature, too weathered for yesterday. These are the bones of Dwarka, the legendary city of Krishna, resting in its watery grave off India's western coast. Stone blocks lie scattered across the ocean floor like fallen prayers, their surfaces worn smooth by tides that have counted 10,000 years. Marine growth clings to their edges, bright corals and swaying anemones that have transformed ancient architecture into an underwater garden. The ruins stretch farther than the eye can follow, disappearing into the blue-black distance, where the continental shelf drops away into deeper mysteries. Here, massive foundation stones rest at impossible angles, as if some titanic force once shook the earth itself. There, the remnants of what might have been streets or ceremonial pathways create geometric patterns in the sand Acidia's skeleton, picked clean by time and tide. Local fishermen have always known something lay beneath these waters. Their nets would snag on invisible obstacles, returning torn and empty from depths that should have yielded abundant catch. Elders spoke in hushed tones of lights glimpsed beneath the waves during certain phases of the moon, of strange currents that seemed to flow upward from the seafloor, carrying with them the faint scent of incense and antiquity. But it wasn't until the 1980s that science began to map this underwater labyrinth, using sonar and submersibles to peer into a realm that mythology had claimed for millennia. What they found challenged not just archaeology, but the very timeline of human civilization itself. Meanwhile, in laboratories far from the sea, marine archaeologists hunched over sonar readouts that resembled abstract art more than scientific data. The images were ghostly, imprecise shadows within shadows that hinted at structures too regular to be natural, too ancient to fit comfortable categories. Dr. S.R. Rao, marine archaeologist extraordinaire, first guided his research vessel across these waters in the early 1980s. His sonar equipment painted the seafloor in electronic whispers, revealing what would become one of India's most controversial archaeological discoveries. The readings showed massive stone formations, arranged in patterns that suggested human design walls, foundations, perhaps even the remains of a once great harbor. As his team descended in diving bells, the water around them transformed from tropical blue to an otherworldly green-black. At depths where pressure crushes ordinary expectations, they found what should not have existed: carefully carved stone blocks, some weighing several tons, arranged in configurations that spoke of sophisticated engineering. The stones bore tool marks, evidence of human craftsmanship that predated many accepted timelines of Indian civilization. Dive reports read like poetry written in technical language. Rectangular stone structures, they noted, aligned with cardinal directions. Pottery fragments emerged from the silt, their surfaces decorated with patterns that echoed motifs found in temples thousands of miles inland. Anchor stones, those maritime fossils of ancient commerce, lay scattered across the sea floor like breadcrumbs marking the path of forgotten trade routes. But perhaps most intriguing were the walls themselves, not random rubble deposited by storms or tectonic activity, but carefully constructed barriers that seemed designed to protect something. From what? From whom? The sea keeps its secrets jealously, revealing only fragments of a larger story that remains tantalizingly incomplete. Each artifact raised from these depths carried with it questions that multiplied like ripples on still water. How old were these ruins? Who built them? And why did they lie beneath 60 feet of water, far below any level the sea had reached in recorded history? The scientific community stirred uneasily. Carbon dating suggested ages that ranged from 3,000 to 9,000 years, a span so vast it encompassed the entire trajectory from Bronze Age cities to the end of the last ice age. Some researchers spoke cautiously of Harappan trading posts, pushed their dating safely into known historical periods. Others whispered of something far older, far stranger. Centuries before sonar ever penetrated these mysterious depths, the Mahabharata sang of a city that defied earthly comparison, Dwarka, the golden capital of Krishna, built not by human hands, but by Vishvakarma, the divine architect of the gods themselves. In those ancient verses, poets described a metropolis that rose from the sea like a dream made manifest. Its walls were built of precious stones, its streets paved with gold and silver. Palaces soared toward the heavens, their spires decorated with banners that fluttered in celestial breezes. Gardens bloomed with flowers that never wilted, and fountains played with water that seemed to sing. This was no ordinary city, but a reflection of paradise itself, a place where mortals and immortals walked the same streets, where time moved differently, where the very architecture seemed to pulse with divine consciousness. The Puranas tell us that Dwarka stretched across 7 islands, connected by bridges that spanned not just water, but the space between worlds. Krishna ruled from this floating paradise for nearly a century. The texts tell us, surrounded by 16,108 queens, each dwelling in her own palace complex. The mathematics of mythology boggles the modern mind, a city vast enough to house 1 million souls, wealthy beyond measure, beautiful beyond description. But like all earthly paradises, it carried within itself the seeds of its own dissolution. The stories agree on the ending, if nothing else. When Krishna departed this world, shot by a hunter's arrow in a forest far from his golden city, the sea itself mourned. The tide rose higher than ever before, swallowing Dwarka whole in a single night. Some versions speak of the city sinking gradually, its inhabitants evacuating to higher ground. Others describe a catastrophic flood that left no time for escape, no chance for rescue. But even as the waters closed over Krishna's capital, the myths insist the city did not die. It merely transformed, becoming an underwater palace where fish swim through marble halls and dolphins play in crystal chambers. On certain nights, when the moon is dark and the sea unusually calm, fishermen claim they can still see lights burning in temple windows far below the waves. These are not merely stories, the believers insist, but memories preserved in amber ancestral recollections of real places, real catastrophes, real losses too profound to forget. The sea swallowed paradise, but memory keeps it alive. As the 1990s dawned, sophisticated diving equipment began to reveal what mythology had long proclaimed. Teams of underwater archaeologists, their movements graceful and dreamlike in the heavy medium of deep water, explored the ruins with cameras and measuring devices, documenting discoveries that challenged comfortable assumptions about India's ancient past. The stone blocks they found were massive, some weighing over 2 tons, cut from sandstone and limestone that had traveled considerable distances to reach this underwater graveyard. These were not random rocks tumbled from cliffs by natural erosion, but carefully shaped building materials that still bore the marks of human tools. Chisel marks scored their surfaces in patterns that spoke of deliberate craftsmanship, while holes drilled for metal clamps suggested construction techniques more sophisticated than previously attributed to the region's ancient inhabitants. Pottery shards emerged from the sediment like messages from a vanished world. When cleaned and cataloged, they revealed decorative motifs that echoed designs found in much later temples scattered across Gujarat and Rajasthan. The continuity was striking, as if the same artistic vocabulary had been passed down through millennia, surviving the catastrophe that drowned its original home. Carbon dating provided the first real surprise. Organic materials trapped within the ruins yielded dates ranging from 1500 BCE to an astonishing 7500 BCE. The older dates placed human habitation at this site well before the Harappan civilization, pushing back the timeline of sophisticated Indian urban planning by thousands of years. The discovery of anchor stones proved particularly significant. These carefully carved weights, used by ancient mariners to secure their vessels, indicated that Dwarka had indeed been a major port exactly as the ancient texts claimed. But the anchor's positions, scattered across what was now deep water, suggested that the harbor had once existed at or near sea level, requiring a dramatic change in ocean height to reach its current depth. Dr. Riau's team mapped the ruins methodically, their underwater surveys revealing a settlement that stretched over several square kilometers. The layout suggested sophisticated urban planning main thoroughfares, intersecting at right angles, residential areas separated from what appeared to be commercial districts, and at the heart of it all, massive foundation stones that might once have supported temples or palaces. Each dive brought new mysteries. Stone circles that might have been wells or ritual pools, long walls that could have been seawalls or the foundations of massive buildings, carved fragments that seemed to depict figures and symbols, though their meaning remained tantalizingly obscure. The evidence was undeniable. Something significant had once stood here, above the waves, in an age when the sea level was dramatically lower than today. Whether it was the mythical Dwarka of Krishna, or simply another forgotten city of India's ancient past, remained hotly debated, but the ruins themselves spoke eloquently of human ambition claimed by the eternal hunger of the sea. But science, like the sea itself, moves in tides. As each new discovery emerged from Dwarka's depths, the archaeological community found itself divided into camps as distinct as oil and water, each viewing the same evidence through different lenses of possibility and skepticism. The mainstream position held firm ground in familiar territory. These ruins, they argued, represented the remnants of a late Harappan settlement, perhaps dating to 1500 to 500 BC, ancient by human standards, but fitting comfortably within established chronologies of Indian civilization. The submersion could be explained by the gradual rise in sea level that had continued since the last ice age, combined with local geological factors that might have caused land subsidence along this particular stretch of coast. This interpretation painted a picture of a prosperous Iron Age port city connected to inland settlements by well-established trade routes. When sea levels rose or earthquakes shifted the coastline, the inhabitants simply moved to higher ground, abandoning their harbor city to the advancing waves. It was a story of adaptation rather than catastrophe, of human resilience in the face of natural change. But alternative researchers saw in the ruins evidence of something far more dramatic. The older carbon dates, they insisted, could not be dismissed as contamination or measurement error. If human settlements had indeed existed here 7,000 or 9,000 years ago, it would revolutionize understanding of post-glacial civilization, not just in India, but worldwide. This radical interpretation suggested that sophisticated urban planning had emerged in South Asia thousands of years before similar developments in Mesopotamia or Egypt. It painted a picture of advanced maritime cultures flourishing along coasts that were later drowned by catastrophic sea level rise at the end of the Younger Dryas period around 9600 BCE. The implications were staggering. If cities like Dwarka existed during the last ice age, then much of what scholars thought they knew about the development of civilization would need to be reconsidered. The traditional narrative of gradual development from hunting and gathering to agriculture to urban planning would be replaced by a more complex story of rises and falls, of civilizations lost to natural catastrophes and slowly rebuilt over millennia. Between these polar positions lay a vast ocean of uncertainty, and in those uncertain waters, the ruins of Dwarka waited patiently for new evidence that might tip the scales of interpretation one way or another. Marine archaeology moved slowly, hampered by the logistics of deep water research and the fragility of underwater sites. Each expedition was expensive, each dive limited by weather and safety concerns. Meanwhile, the sea itself remained impartial, concealing its secrets with the same indifference it had shown for millennia. Whether the stones beneath its surface were 3,000 or 9,000 years old made no difference to the currents that swirled around them, or the fish that sheltered in their shadows. Geologically speaking, overnight lasted several centuries, but to the coastal peoples who witnessed the transformation, the Arabian Sea's advance must have seemed terrifyingly swift. As the last ice age released its grip on the planet around 11,000 years ago, vast ice sheets covering North America and Northern Europe began their inexorable melt, pouring billions of gallons of fresh water into the world's oceans. The process was not gradual or uniform. Scientists now understand that ice sheet collapses could raise global sea levels by several meters within decades, catastrophic from the perspective of any civilization established along the world's coastlines. In the span of a few human generations, entire landscapes vanished beneath the waves. This was not unique to the Indian Ocean. Around the world, archaeologists have discovered the ghostly remains of drowned settlements that tell similar stories of civilizations claimed by rising seas. Heracleion, the legendary port city of ancient Egypt, lies 30 feet beneath the Mediterranean, its temples and statues now home to schools of fish. The monument at Yonaguni, off the coast of Japan, presents massive stone terraces that some argue are man-made structures from before the flood. Off the coast of Greece, the ancient city of Pavlopitre rests beneath 20 feet of clear blue water, its streets and buildings so well preserved that archaeologists can map its urban layout in detail. Carbon dating places its submersion around 1000 BCE, but the city itself may be far older, built when the sea level was much lower than today. Perhaps most intriguingly, sonar surveys in the Gulf of Kamat, near Dwarka, have revealed what appear to be the ruins of enormous cities covering areas larger than Manhattan. These structures, lying beneath 130 feet of water, would have been submerged when sea levels rose dramatically at the end of the last glacial period. The pattern repeats across the globe: underwater ruins that challenge comfortable timelines, that suggest human civilization is both older and more vulnerable than previously imagined. Each drowned city represents not just architectural achievement, but the dreams and aspirations of peoples whose names have been erased by time and tide. For the inhabitants of these lost worlds, the rising sea would have been an existential crisis beyond modern comprehension. Imagine watching your harbor fill with water that never receded, seeing your fields become salt marshes, your temples transformed into islands that grew smaller with each passing season, until they too disappeared beneath the waves. In the vast archives of the sea, every grain of sand tells a story. The Arabian Sea, like all of Earth's great waters, functions as both destroyer and preserver, erasing civilizations from the surface while simultaneously entombing their remains in protective layers of sediment. Consider the journey of a single particle of quartz, worn smooth by eons of tumbling through ancient rivers. It might have witnessed the first stone tools shaped by human hands, felt the footsteps of hunters tracking mammoth across frozen steppes, or rested in the mortar of a temple wall when Dwarka gleamed white in the morning sun. Now it lies buried in the seafloor, one mote in an infinite collection of such witnesses. The ocean's memory works differently than human recollection. Where we forget, the sea remembers. Where we embellish, the sea preserves the unvarnished truth. Every layer of sediment that settles on the ruins of Dwarka adds another page to this underwater library, protecting organic materials that might otherwise decay, sealing pottery fragments and metal artifacts in anaerobic environments where they can survive for millennia. Marine archaeologists speak of the sea as both ally and adversary. Its waters can preserve wooden ship hulls for thousands of years while simultaneously corroding metal artifacts beyond recognition. Temperature and salinity create microclimates within the ruins themselves, some areas acting as natural preservatives, others as aggressive agents of decay. The tides that roll over Dwarka twice daily carry more than salt water. They transport microscopic organisms, chemical nutrients, and suspended particles from across the Arabian Sea basin. Some of these materials settle into the ruins, gradually burying artifacts deeper in protective sediment. Others scour exposed surfaces, slowly erasing carved details and reducing massive stone blocks to rounded boulders. But perhaps the sea's most profound act of preservation lies not in its physical protection of artifacts, but in its role as keeper of stories. The drowned cities scattered across the world's ocean floors represent a vast, underwater museum of human achievement and loss. Each site holds evidence of how our ancestors lived, what they valued, and how they responded to environmental crisis. The currents that flow past Dwarka, connected to a global network of such sites carrying sediments from the Indus River Delta, nutrients from the Arabian Peninsula, and microscopic life forms from the equatorial Pacific. In this sense, the ruins are not isolated relics, but part of a living system that encompasses the entire planet. As night falls over the modern city of Dwarka, far above the drowned ruins that share its name, the sea continues its patient work of preservation and erosion, memory and forgetting. Tomorrow's tide may uncover artifacts that have been hidden for centuries, or it may bury forever structures that recent storms have exposed. The juxtaposition could hardly be more striking. Above the waves, modern Dwarka thrums with the energy of pilgrimage, a city of temples where thousands of devotees arrive daily to worship at shrines dedicated to Krishna. The air fills with the sound of conch shells and temple bells, the fragrance of incense and marigold garlands, the gentle chaos of faith made manifest in marble and gold. This terrestrial Dwarka sprawls along the same coastline where its legendary namesake supposedly once stood. The Dwarkadish temple, with its soaring spires and intricate carvings, serves as the spiritual focal point for millions of Hindus who believe they are walking in the footsteps of divinity. Pilgrims bathe in the sacred waters of the Gombe River where it meets the sea, believing that this confluence carries special power to wash away sins and grant spiritual merit. The temple's main shrine houses a black stone idol of Krishna, adorned with silk and jewels, surrounded by offerings of flowers, sweets, and whispered prayers. 5 times daily, elaborate rituals transform the sanctuary into a theater of devotion priests chanting ancient Sanskrit verses while oil lamps flicker and sacred fires burn. The faithful press forward for darshan, that moment of spiritual connection achieved through seeing and being seen by the divine. But 60 feet below this pageant of contemporary faith, a different kind of sanctuary exists in the blue-green twilight of the sea floor. Here, covered in centuries of marine growth, stone foundations create a mirror image of the world above another sacred geography, but one inhabited by fish instead of pilgrims, lit by filtered sunlight instead of oil lamps. The parallel is not accidental. Hindu cosmology speaks of multiple levels of reality existing simultaneously, worlds within worlds, each reflecting divine truth from a different perspective. The surface Dwarka represents the eternal present of worship and devotion. The submerged ruins suggest the eternal past, when gods walked among mortals and paradise briefly touched the earth. Local priests, when pressed about the underwater discoveries, speak carefully. Some acknowledge the ruins as evidence of their tradition as ancient, roots proof that the sacred geography they serve has indeed been holy for millennia. Others maintain a more mystical interpretation, suggesting that the drowned city exists in a different dimension of reality, accessible only to those with the proper spiritual preparation. The pilgrims themselves seem largely unaware of the archaeological drama unfolding beneath the waters they consider sacred. They come seeking darshan, not artifact analysis. Their faith requires no carbon dating, no sonar verification. The presence of Krishna's ancient city lies not in stone foundations, but in the continued vitality of worship, the unbroken chain of devotion that connects them to the divine. Yet even the most devout cannot entirely ignore the sea's testimony. On days when the water is particularly clear, fishing boats sometimes report glimpsing structures beneath the waves. During exceptionally low tides, the tops of submerged walls occasionally break the surface, creating tiny islands that exist for only a few hours before disappearing again beneath the advancing water. The engineering that emerges from Dwarka's depths speaks in a vocabulary both familiar and strange. Each stone block raised by marine archaeologists carries the fingerprints of builders who understood weight and balance, stress and foundation, but whose techniques remain frustratingly mysterious. The blocks themselves are massive, precisely cut sandstone and limestone pieces that fit together with remarkable accuracy. Many show evidence of sophisticated joinery, with tenon and mortise connections that would not look out of place in a modern construction site. Metal clamps once held the larger pieces together, their bronze or iron traces still visible in carefully drilled holes that speak of planning and permanence. What strikes researchers most forcefully is the orientation of these underwater walls. They align with cardinal directions with an accuracy that suggests astronomical knowledge, the kind of precise positioning found in temples and major civic buildings throughout the ancient world. This is not the random arrangement of stones tumbled by natural forces, but the deliberate geometry of human intention. The harbor structures present perhaps the most intriguing puzzle. Long walls extend into what is now deep water, their placement suggesting they once protected an anchorage from the full force of ocean swells. The engineering required to build such massive breakwaters would have demanded not just skilled stone cutting, but sophisticated understanding of marine hydraulics, knowledge of how waves behave, how currents flow, how to create calm water in the midst of oceanic turbulence. Some of the stone arrangements form what appear to be docking areas, with regular intervals that might have accommodated merchant vessels of various sizes. If the interpretation is correct, these ruins represent one of the world's oldest known artificial harbors, engineering achievement that places its builders among the most advanced maritime cultures of their era. But controversy swirls around every interpretation. What some archaeologists see as clear evidence of human construction, others dismiss as natural rock formations shaped by geological processes. The sea, they argue, is quite capable of creating regular patterns through wave action and chemical weathering. Without more extensive excavation, difficult and expensive in deep water definitive proof remains elusive. The tool marks visible on many stones provide some of the strongest evidence for human origin. These are not the random scoring left by natural abrasion, but the regular, parallel grooves created by metal chisels wielded by skilled craftsmen. Similar marks appear on stone blocks in temples throughout Gujarat and Rajasthan, suggesting technological continuity across vast spans of time. Most mysteriously, some blocks show signs of having been quarried from locations dozens of miles inland, then transported to the coast for use in marine construction. The logistics of such an operation, moving multi-ton stones across rugged terrain to build harbors that now lie beneath the sea, suggests a level of social organization and technological capability that challenges conventional timelines of Indian civilization. As research continues, each newly discovered block adds another piece to an architectural puzzle that grows more complex, rather than clearer with each solution. Long before Portuguese navigators rounded the Cape of Good Hope, the Indian Ocean served as humanity's first global highway. Evidence suggests that sophisticated maritime trade networks connected the coasts of India, Arabia, and East Africa as early as 2500 BCE, and possibly much earlier if the more radical dating of sites like Dwarka proves accurate. The Harappan civilization, centered in the Indus Valley, left behind some of the world's most remarkable evidence of ancient seafaring. At Lothal, in Gujarat, not far from modern Dwarka, archaeologists have uncovered what may be the world's oldest known artificial dock, an engineering marvel that demonstrates intimate understanding of tidal mechanics and harbor design. The dock's lock gate system allowed ships to enter and leave regardless of tide levels, while its massive walls protected vessels from storms. Harappan seals have been discovered as far west as Mesopotamia, proving that Indian merchants were regular visitors to Babylon and Ur over 4,000 years ago. These small stone tablets, carved with mysterious script and animal motifs, served as ancient passports and letters of credit, facilitating trade across thousands of miles of open ocean. The trade goods themselves paint a picture of sophisticated international commerce. Indian ivory appeared in Mesopotamian palaces, while lapis lazuli from Afghanistan decorated Harappan jewelry. Pearls from the Persian Gulf adorned Indian nobility, while cotton textiles from the subcontinent became prized commodities in markets from Egypt to Central Asia. Perhaps most remarkably, recent research has revealed that ancient Indian mariners possessed detailed knowledge of seasonal wind patterns, using monsoon cycles to plan voyages with remarkable precision. Ships would depart India's western coast in November, riding the northeast monsoon to Arabia and Africa, then return in March and April, before the southwest winds made sailing dangerous. This maritime expertise helps explain how coastal cities like the original Dwarka could have flourished. They served as crucial nodes in trade networks that spanned continents, accumulating wealth and knowledge from across the known world. The sophisticated harbor construction revealed in the underwater ruins makes perfect sense in this context. These were not isolated settlements, but integral parts of a global economy. The implications for understanding Dwarka's submerged ruins are profound. If ancient Indians possessed such advanced maritime technology and knowledge, then the engineering achievements visible on the seafloor become not mysterious anomalies, but logical expressions of a sophisticated civilization that has been dramatically underestimated by modern scholarship. The numbers refuse to cooperate with comfortable narratives. When Dr. S.R. Rao's team began carbon dating organic materials from Dwarka's underwater ruins, they expected results that would place the site firmly within known historical periods, perhaps contemporary with the Harappan civilization, or possibly dating to the early Iron Age. Instead, the laboratory reports delivered dates that seemed to belong to an entirely different world. Wood fragments and other organic materials consistently yielded ages between 7,000 and 9,000 years, placing human activity at the site well before the emergence of any known sophisticated civilization in the Indian subcontinent. The 9,000-year date was particularly shocking. It placed construction activity at Dwarka around 7,000 BCE, during the final millennia of the last ice age. At that time, according to conventional archaeology, South Asia was populated primarily by hunter-gatherer groups who had not yet developed agriculture, much less the urban planning and monumental architecture evident in the underwater ruins. The scientific community's response was swift and skeptical. Such ancient dates, critics argued, must result from contamination of the samples with older organic material, or from fundamental errors in the dating process itself. The implications of accepting the dates at face value were simply too radical to contemplate. They would require rewriting the entire timeline of human civilization. But Dr. Rao and his supporters stood by the results. Multiple samples from different areas of the site had yielded consistently ancient dates. More importantly, the organic material had been found in direct association with the stone structures themselves, not random debris that might have drifted in from elsewhere, but materials that appeared to be contemporary with the site's construction and use. Independent testing by other laboratories produced similar results, adding weight to the controversial dates. Gradually, a small but vocal group of researchers began to argue that the evidence could not be dismissed simply because it contradicted established theories. If the dates were accurate, they suggested, then scholars needed to reconsider their assumptions about the pace and pattern of human development. The debate centered on a fundamental question. Is it possible that sophisticated urban civilizations existed during the last ice age, only to be destroyed by the catastrophic environmental changes that marked the transition to our current geological epoch? The conventional answer was no such civilizations would have left more extensive archaeological evidence. But proponents of the ancient dating pointed out that most Ice Age coastlines now lie beneath hundreds of feet of water, making their archaeological investigation extremely difficult. The controversy surrounding Dwarka's age reflects broader tensions within archaeology about the antiquity of human civilization. Recent discoveries at sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey have already pushed back the timeline of monumental architecture by thousands of years, demonstrating that hunter-gatherer societies were capable of remarkable achievements previously attributed only to agricultural civilizations. Whether Dwarka represents another such revolutionary discovery, or simply an example of how misleading carbon dating can be, remains hotly contested. The sea keeps its secrets well, yielding evidence slowly and ambiguously, leaving researchers to debate interpretations that grow more complex with each new discovery. To understand the mystery of Dwarka's age, one must journey backward through time to a world dramatically different from our own, the planet as it existed 10,000 years ago, when vast ice sheets still covered much of North America and Northern Europe, and sea levels stood nearly 400 feet lower than today. In that vanished world, the western coast of India extended far beyond its current boundaries. What is now the Arabian Sea was then a series of river valleys and coastal plains, interrupted by scattered lakes and meandering streams. The continental shelf, now submerged beneath hundreds of feet of water, formed a vast landscape of rolling hills and fertile valleys that stretched westward for hundreds of miles. Archaeological surveys of other continental shelves have revealed evidence of extensive human habitation during this period. Off the coast of Europe, trawling nets regularly bring up prehistoric tools and mammoth bones from areas that were dry land during the Ice Age. Similar discoveries along the southeastern coast of the United States have revealed the remains of forests and freshwater springs that once supported thriving ecosystems. In this context, the possibility of advanced settlements along India's Ice Age coastline becomes less fantastic. The submerged continental shelf would have provided vast areas of habitable land, with rivers providing fresh water and transportation routes, coastal lagoons offering protected harbors, and elevated areas suitable for permanent settlements. Climate reconstructions suggest that this vanished landscape enjoyed favorable conditions for human habitation. The monsoon patterns that still govern South Asian weather would have brought reliable seasonal rains, while the lower sea level would have created a more temperate climate than exists today. Vast river systems, fed by glacial melt from the Himalayas, would have created oasis-like conditions across what is now ocean floor. If sophisticated settlements did exist in this drowned world, their submersion would have been gradual at first, then catastrophically rapid. As the great ice sheets began their final collapse around 11,000 years ago, sea levels rose in fits and starts, sometimes gradually, over centuries sometimes, dramatically over just a few decades, when major ice dams burst or ice sheets collapsed entirely. The inhabitants of coastal settlements would have faced a slow-motion catastrophe that unfolded over many generations. Each century would have brought the shoreline closer to their cities. Each major storm would have penetrated farther inland. Each generation would have been forced to abandon settlements that their grandparents had considered permanent. By 7,000 years ago, most of these Ice Age coastlines lay beneath the waves, carrying with them any evidence of the civilizations they might have supported. Only the highest points, places like the ridge where Dwarka's ruins now rest, would have remained above water long enough to be discovered by modern archaeology. This geological scenario provides a plausible context for the controversial dating of Dwarka's ruins. Rather than representing an impossible anomaly, the site might be one of the few surviving fragments of a much larger civilization that was gradually claimed by the rising sea. The paleoclimate data tells a story of transformation so dramatic it reads like mythology made manifest. Around 9,000 years ago, as the last Ice Age finally released its grip on the planet South Asia, experienced what scientists term the monsoon maximum, a period when seasonal rains fell with an intensity that transformed the entire subcontinent into a landscape of lakes, rivers, and verdant grasslands. Imagine the Thar Desert, now one of the world's most arid regions, as a vast savanna dotted with freshwater lakes. Picture the Deccan Plateau, today a semi-arid highland, as a rolling landscape of rivers and wetlands that supported massive populations of wildlife and, quite possibly, humans. This was not gradual change, but environmental revolution that unfolded over a few thousand years, rapid from a geological perspective, but slow enough for human societies to adapt and flourish. The enhanced monsoon was driven by orbital changes that brought Earth closer to the sun during Northern Hemisphere summers, intensifying the seasonal heating that draws moisture-laden air inland from the Indian Ocean. The result was precipitation levels that dwarfed anything experienced in recorded history. Annual rainfall that might have been 3 or 4 times greater than modern averages across vast areas of the subcontinent. River systems that today carry only seasonal water became mighty torrents that flowed year-round. The Saraswati, the mysterious river praised in the earliest Vedic hymns, but now reduced to scattered seasonal streams, was then a major waterway that rivaled the Ganges in volume and importance. Archaeological surveys along its ancient course have revealed evidence of dense settlement patterns that suggest it supported large populations during this period of climatic abundance. This was the world in which, according to the controversial dating, Dwarka might have flourished. The site's location on what is now a submerged ridge would then have been a strategic position overlooking vast river deltas and coastal plains. The engineering skills evident in the underwater ruins, the sophisticated harbor construction, the massive stone blocks, the precise astronomical alignment make perfect sense in the context of a civilization enjoying unprecedented prosperity thanks to abundant water and fertile land. But this golden age was not destined to last. Around 6,000 years ago, the same orbital mechanics that had intensified the monsoon began to work in reverse. Summers became cooler, drawing less moisture inland from the oceans. The great rivers began to shrink, the lakes started to dry up, and vast populations were forced to migrate toward the few remaining sources of reliable water. The transition was not immediate. Climate change rarely is. But over the course of a few centuries, much of South Asia transformed from a water-rich paradise into the more arid landscape familiar today. Settlements that had thrived beside great rivers found themselves stranded in increasingly barren landscapes, their populations forced to abandon carefully constructed cities and seek survival elsewhere. This climatic catastrophe provides another possible explanation for the abandonment of sites like Dwarka. Perhaps the city was not destroyed by rising seas alone, but by the double catastrophe of drought, inland and flooding along the coast, environmental pressures that no civilization, however sophisticated, could have resisted. On certain nights, when the moon is dark and the sea unusually calm, local fishermen report phenomena that science struggles to explain. Beneath the gentle waves off the coast of modern Dwarka, lights appear to dance and flicker in the depth, not the harsh illumination of underwater equipment, but soft, golden glows that seem to pulse with organic rhythm. The lights appear most frequently during the monsoon season, when heavy rains reduce the salinity of coastal waters and create conditions that marine biologists recognize as ideal for bioluminescent organisms. Dinoflagellates, microscopic marine plants that emit light when disturbed, can create spectacular displays under the right conditions, turning entire stretches of ocean into liquid galaxies of blue-green fire. But the lights reported off Dwarka are different. They appear golden rather than blue-green, and they seem to emanate from fixed points near the sea floor rather than drifting with the currents. Most mysteriously, they appear to be arranged in patterns, regular geometric formations that suggest something more than random biological activity. Scientific expeditions have attempted to photograph and study these phenomena, but the lights seem to appear only when human observers are few and cameras absent. Marine biologists suggest that the disturbance caused by research vessels might be enough to disrupt whatever delicate conditions create the displays in the first place. Local tradition offers a different explanation entirely. The lights, according to fishermen whose families have worked these waters for generations, are the temple fires of the drowned city oil lamps that Krishna's sea priests lit thousands of years ago, and that somehow continue to burn beneath the waves. The patterns in which they appear correspond, the stories claim, to the layout of the original city's temples and palaces. More poetic observers suggest that the lights represent something even more mysterious, perhaps the bioluminescent equivalent of phantom limbs, the sea's own memory of structures that once stood above its surface. In this interpretation, the marine organisms that now inhabit the ruins have somehow absorbed and recreated the illumination patterns of the vanished city, turning the entire underwater site into a living monument to its own lost glory. Whatever their true cause, the lights have become part of Dwarka's modern mythology. Pilgrims who come to worship at the surface temples sometimes charter boats to witness the phenomenon, hoping to glimpse evidence of their faith made manifest in the physical world. Most see nothing but dark water, but a few return with stories of golden glows dancing in the depths, of patterns too regular for nature, too beautiful for science. The sea keeps its secrets, but occasionally offers tantalizing glimpses of mysteries that may never be fully understood. Who were they, these anonymous architects whose work rests beneath the Arabian Sea? The question haunts every discussion of Dwarka's underwater ruins because the conventional timeline of Indian civilization provides no comfortable answer. If the structures are truly 7,000 to 9,000 years old, they predate every known sophisticated culture in the subcontinent by millennia. The builders left no written records, no artistic signatures carved into their massive stone blocks. They spoke no language that has been deciphered, worshipped gods whose names have been forgotten, organized their society according to principles that remain mysterious. Yet their engineering achievements suggest a level of technical sophistication that rivals much later civilizations. Consider the scale of organization required to construct the underwater harbor complex. Quarrying multi-ton stone blocks, transporting them across dozens of miles of difficult terrain, cutting them to precise specifications, and assembling them into massive structures would have required the coordinated effort of thousands of workers over many years. Such projects demand not just technical knowledge, but complex social institutions capable of organizing and feeding large labor forces, maintaining quality control over extended periods, and preserving engineering knowledge across generations. The astronomical alignment of the ruins suggests another kind of sophistication-detailed observation of celestial movements and the mathematical knowledge needed to translate those observations into precise architectural orientations. This was not the work of simple hunter-gatherers, but of a culture that had developed formal education systems capable of training specialist astronomer architects. Parallels exist elsewhere in the world. The megalithic builders of Western Europe, working during roughly the same period, demonstrated similar capabilities in sites like Newgrange and Stonehenge. The creators of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey carved massive stone pillars and arranged them in complex patterns more than 11,000 years ago. In each case, sophisticated engineering appeared among societies that archaeology had previously characterized as primitive. Perhaps most intriguingly, the builders of underwater sites around the world seem to have shared certain technical approaches. The megalithic structures off the coast of Japan at Yanaguni, the drowned harbor installations near Malta, and the submerged city ruins in the Gulf of Komhat all display similar engineering principles: massive stone construction, precise geometric planning, and evidence of sophisticated understanding of marine hydraulics. This might represent convergent evolution of engineering solutions to similar problems, but it raises another possibility: that the builders of these scattered sites were part of a broader cultural network, connected by trade relationships and shared technological knowledge. If so, the anonymous architects of Dwarka might not have been isolated innovators, but participants in a global civilization whose existence has been erased by rising seas and shifting continents. The mystery deepens when one considers the sudden apparent disappearance of this building tradition. The engineering knowledge evident in Dwarka's ruins seems to have vanished as completely as the civilization that created them, only to reappear thousands of years later in the Harappan cities of the Indus Valley. Were the later civilizations entirely independent developments, or did they somehow inherit fragments of much older traditions? When European scholars first encountered descriptions of Dwarka in Sanskrit texts during the colonial period, the parallels to Plato's account of Atlantis seemed too striking to ignore. Both stories described magnificent island cities, ruled by divine or semi-divine kings, possessed of advanced technology and fabulous wealth, ultimately destroyed by catastrophic floods that left no trace of their former glory. The comparison was irresistible to 19th and early 20th century writers, who eagerly embraced the possibility that ancient flood myths from around the world might preserve memories of real historical events. Theosophists like Helena Blavatsky incorporated both Atlantis and Dwarka into elaborate theories about lost civilizations that had supposedly achieved spiritual and technological heights unknown to the modern world. These speculative connections gained new life when underwater archaeology began revealing actual ruins off the Indian coast. Suddenly, the mythical city of Krishna had physical evidence to support its existence, not proof of its divine origins, perhaps, but concrete verification that sophisticated settlements had indeed existed in locations now claimed by the sea. The parallels between Plato's Atlantis and the descriptions of Dwarka in Hindu texts are genuinely striking. Both cities were said to possess concentric rings of canals or harbors. Both were described as centers of maritime trade that connected distant lands. Both were portrayed as having achieved levels of luxury and technological sophistication that surpassed their contemporary civilizations. Most significantly, both stories end with submersion beneath the waves, not gradual decline, but sudden catastrophic destruction that left only legends and scattered refugees to carry the memory of what had been lost. In Plato's account, Atlantis disappears in a single day and night of earthquakes and floods. The Puranas describe Dwarka being swallowed by the sea immediately after Krishna's death. Some researchers have suggested that both stories might be garbled memories of the same historical event: catastrophic sea level rise that occurred at the end of the last ice age. In this interpretation, Plato as Atlantis and the Sanskrit Dwarka represent different cultural versions of shared human memories about coastal civilizations, destroyed by rising oceans around 9,000 to 7,000 years ago. The theory gains some support from flood myths found in cultures around the world. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes a great flood that destroys civilization, while Noah's flood in Hebrew tradition serves a similar narrative function. Hindu tradition includes the story of Manu, who saves humanity and animals in a great boat during a world-destroying deluge. Similar stories appear in the mythologies of peoples as diverse as the Native Americans of the Pacific Northwest and the Aboriginal Australians. If these diverse traditions do preserve memories of real historical events, then the discoveries at Dwarka take on global significance. The submerged ruins would represent not just an isolated archaeological curiosity, but one of the few surviving traces of a worldwide catastrophe that ended an entire phase of human civilization. Critics argue that such universal flood myths more likely reflect common psychological or spiritual themes rather than shared historical memories. Floods are traumatic enough events in any culture that they naturally become metaphors for divine judgment, social transformation, or cosmic renewal. The evidence accumulates like sediment on a sea floor, slow, steady, and ultimately overwhelming. Across the world's continental shelves, marine geologists have mapped the ghostly outlines of ancient coastlines that once supported landscapes as vast and varied as any that exist today. These drowned worlds, submerged by post-glacial sea level rise, represent the largest archaeological sites on Earth and the most inaccessible. The scale of submersion becomes clear when one considers the numbers. During the last glacial maximum, approximately 20,000 years ago, sea levels stood nearly 400 feet lower than today. This exposed continental shelf areas, totaling roughly 8 million square miles territory, equivalent to the combined area of North and South America. All of this land now lies beneath the ocean, along with any archaeological evidence it might once have contained. The submersion was not uniform or gradual. Geological evidence suggests that sea level rise occurred in distinct pulses, often corresponding to the catastrophic collapse of major ice sheets. Around 14,700 years ago, sea levels rose approximately 65 feet in less than 500 years, a rate of change that would have been devastating to any coastal settlements. Similar pulses occurred around 11,500 years ago, and again around 8,200 years ago. Perhaps most dramatically, evidence from coral reefs and other sea level indicators suggests that around 7,600 years ago, a massive glacial dam burst in North America, released the contents of Lake Agassiz, a body of water larger than all the current Great Lakes combined, into the North Atlantic in a matter of months. The resulting sea level rise may have reached 10 feet globally, enough to flood coastal settlements with little warning. These catastrophic events provide a plausible context for understanding sites like Dwarka. If the controversial ancient dating is correct, the settlement might have been established during one of the relatively stable periods between major sea level rise events, only to be gradually abandoned as rising waters made its position untenable. The drowned world hypothesis gained support from discoveries being made on continental shelves around the globe. Off the coast of Britain, sonar surveys have revealed extensive landscapes of hills, valleys, and river systems that were dry land as recently as 8,000 years ago. Fishing nets regularly bring up prehistoric tools, animal bones, and plant remains from areas that are now beneath 100 feet of water. Similar discoveries have been made off virtually every coast where systematic surveys have been conducted. The North Sea, the English Channel, the Gulf of Mexico, the Persian Gulf all contain evidence of terrestrial ecosystems that supported human habitation during the Ice Age. The absence of clear archaeological evidence for advanced civilizations on these drowned landscapes might simply reflect the difficulty and expense of underwater investigation. The implications are staggering. If even a small percentage of these submerged continental shelf areas contain settlements comparable to Dwarka, then the archaeological record available to land-based researchers represents only a fraction of human achievement during the late Pleistocene and early Holocene periods. The ocean floors may hold evidence of entire phases of human development that have been literally erased from the accessible archaeological record. In the twilight realm where history dissolves into legend, flood stories emerge from virtually every culture on Earth with remarkable consistency. From the cedar tablets of ancient Mesopotamia to the oral traditions of Pacific Islander cultures, from the hieroglyphic records of Egypt to the painted codices of Mesoamerica, humanity has preserved memories of world-destroying deluges with obsessive persistence. The Epic of Gilgamesh, carved into cuneiform tablets nearly 4,000 years ago, describes how the gods decided to destroy humanity with a great flood, sparing only Utnapishtim and his family, who survived by building a great boat. The story's parallels to the biblical account of Noah are so precise that scholars now recognize both as variants of a much older Mesopotamian tradition. But the flood myth extends far beyond the Middle East. Hindu tradition tells of Manu, the first man, who was warned by Vishnu to build a great ship before the cosmic deluge that will end the current age of the world. Manu saves not only his family, but representatives of all species, becoming the ancestor of the renewed human race. The parallels to both Noah and Utnapishtim are unmistakable. Celtic mythology describes the flood of Llyn Llyn, which destroyed all living creatures except for two survivors who repopulated the world. Greek tradition includes the story of Deucalion's flood, sent by Zeus to punish human wickedness, survived only by Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha. Norse mythology tells of a blood flood that drowns all the frost giants except one pair. Perhaps most remarkably, similar stories appear among cultures that had no known contact with Old World civilizations. The Ojibwe of North America tell of a great flood from which humanity was saved by a great raft. The Inca of South America preserved legends of a world-destroying deluge survived by a handful of people in the highest mountains. Aboriginal Australians tell of the time when the sea rose to cover all the land except the highest peaks. Traditional scholarship has generally explained these universal flood myths as independent developments reflecting common human concerns about divine judgment and cosmic renewal. The psychological interpretation suggests that floods are traumatic enough events in any culture that they naturally become metaphors for existential crisis and rebirth. But the discoveries at sites like Dwarka, combined with geological evidence of catastrophic sea level rise at the end of the Ice Age, suggest another possibility, that these diverse traditions preserve genuine historical memories of real events that occurred during the transition from glacial to interglacial conditions. The timing is suggestive. Most flood myths describe the deluge as occurring in the relatively recent past, not in some primordial cosmic age, but within a few generations of the storyteller's present. This matches what we know about the final pulse of post-glacial sea level rise, which occurred around 70 to 80 years ago, recent enough for oral tradition to preserve memories of the event, but ancient enough for those memories to become mythologized over time. If this interpretation is correct, then the flood myths represent humanity's earliest historical records, not literal accounts of divine intervention, but culturally transmitted memories of the greatest natural catastrophe experienced by our species since the emergence of civilization. In the sterile confines of research vessels floating above Dwarka's drowned remains, modern pilgrims of a different sort pursue their own form of darshan, that moment of revelation achieved not through religious devotion, but through the systematic accumulation of evidence. Marine archaeologists, their equipment cases packed with sonar devices and underwater cameras, seek the same fundamental connection to truth that draws millions to the temples above. Each expedition brings new technology to bear on ancient mysteries. Side-scan sonar maps the seafloor with unprecedented precision, revealing details of construction that human eyes could never distinguish. In the blue-green twilight 60 feet below the surface, remotely operated vehicles navigate between stone blocks with mechanical precision, their cameras capturing images that allow researchers to study tool marks and construction techniques without the time constraints imposed by human diving. The most recent surveys have employed magnetometry to detect metal artifacts buried beneath layers of marine sediment. The technique has revealed anomalies that suggest the presence of bronze or iron objects scattered throughout the ruins, potentially including tools, weapons, or decorative elements that could provide crucial evidence about the site's builders and their technological capabilities. But for all their sophisticated equipment, the researchers face the same fundamental challenge that has plagued underwater archaeology since its inception: the sea as reluctance to yield its secrets quickly or completely. Each dive is limited by depth, visibility, and weather conditions. Each expedition must balance the desire for extensive excavation against the need to preserve fragile underwater environments for future study. The human element remains crucial. Experienced dive archaeologists speak of an almost mystical ability to recognize significant features on the sea floor, the subtle differences in texture and color that distinguish worked stone from natural rock, the slight variations in marine growth that reveal buried artifacts the geometric patterns that suggest human intention, rather than random geological processes. Dr. Rao, now in his 80s, continues to make annual pilgrimages to the site he first explored decades ago. His weathered hands still steady on diving equipment, his eyes still sharp for the details that distinguish archaeological evidence from natural formation. He speaks of Dwarka with the same reverence that traditional pilgrims reserve for sacred sites, a place where human ambition met cosmic forces, where the boundary between myth and history dissolves in salt water and ancient stone. A younger generation of researchers brings different perspectives to the investigation. Armed with degrees in marine geology and underwater robotics, they approach the ruins with fewer preconceptions about what they should find. Some focus on the site's geological context, seeking to understand how natural processes might have created structures that appear artificial. Others pursue biochemical analysis of organic materials, hoping to resolve the dating controversies that have surrounded the site since its discovery. The pilgrimage continues driven by the same fundamental human impulse that has drawn seekers to sacred sites throughout history: the need to understand our place in the vast sweep of time, to connect with forces larger than individual existence, to glimpse truth that transcends the limitations of everyday perception. Along India's western coastline, ancient temples demonstrate an acoustic phenomenon that engineers are only beginning to understand. The Somnath Temple, destroyed and rebuilt numerous times throughout history, but maintaining its original architectural proportions, emits a distinctive humming resonance during high tide that can be heard for miles inland. The effect appears to result from the precise mathematical relationships built into the temple's proportions. The main sanctuary, its surrounding walls, and even the placement of subsidiary shrines create a complex acoustic chamber that amplifies and modifies the sound of waves striking the foundation. During high tide, when water reaches the temple's base, the entire structure becomes a massive musical instrument played by the sea itself. Similar phenomena occur at coastal temples throughout Gujarat and Tamil Nadu. The shore temple at Mahabalipuram, carved from solid granite in the 7th century, produces deep, organ-like tones when storm waves crash against its seaward face. Local tradition holds that these sounds represent the temple's prayers, carried on the wind to distant gods. Modern acoustic analysis has revealed that the temple builders possessed sophisticated understanding of resonance and harmonic relationships. The internal dimensions of many coastal sanctuaries correspond to mathematical ratios that create standing wave patterns, amplifying specific frequencies while dampening others. The result is that natural sounds, wind, waves, even human voices are transformed into something approaching music. The phenomenon takes on additional significance when considered in the context of Dwarka's underwater ruins. If the drowned city once included temples built according to similar acoustic principles, the sea floor might still resonate with architectural music played by deep ocean currents. The mysterious lights reported by fishermen might have acoustic counterparts, sounds too low or too subtle for human ears, but perceptible to marine life that has adapted to the underwater ruins as artificial reefs. Ancient Indian architectural treatises describe the ideal temple as a cosmic instrument designed to harmonize earthly and divine realms. The acoustic properties of coastal temples suggest that this was not merely metaphorical language, but practical instruction for builders who understood sound as a bridge between physical and spiritual dimensions. When the sea rose to claim the original Dwarka, it may have silenced more than stone temples. It may have drowned an entire symphony of architectural music that once connected land and sea in harmonic relationship. The resonant temples that still survive above water might be the last remaining instruments in an orchestral arrangement that once spanned the entire coastline. The songs continue, played by tides that remember the rhythm of vanished temples, carried on winds that once carried the prayers of a civilization that built its monuments to sing with the sea. Faith operates on geological timescales, flowing like water through landscapes of belief that shift and change while somehow maintaining essential contours across millennia. In the case of Dwarka, the continuity is remarkable, a sacred geography that has preserved its spiritual significance through the rise and fall of empires, the coming and going of languages, the gradual transformation of the physical landscape itself. The modern pilgrims who crowd the temples of contemporary Dwarka walk in footsteps that may be thousands of years old. Their devotional practices echo rituals that were ancient when the Buddha taught, when the Mauryan Empire ruled much of India, when the Guptas created their golden age of art and literature. Yet the essential act remains unchanged. The journey to sacred space, the offering of prayers and gifts, the seeking of divine presence in human community. Archaeological evidence suggests that the site has been continuously sacred for at least 2,500 years, roughly the entire span of recorded Indian history. Pottery fragments and architectural remains from successive periods create a stratified record of devotion, each layer representing generations of pilgrims who considered this ground holy. But if the underwater ruins are truly as ancient as some researchers claim, then the sacred tradition might extend back twice as far into the mists of prehistoric time. This longevity of faith presents its own mysteries. What qualities make certain places seem naturally sacred to human consciousness? Why do some locations attract continuous religious attention across vast spans of time, while others are quickly abandoned when circumstances change? The answer may lie in a complex interaction of geography, history, and what depth psychologists call the collective unconscious shared patterns of meaning that transcend individual cultures. Dwarka's position at the meeting point of land and sea certainly contributes to its spiritual power. Across cultures and throughout history, humans have recognized coastlines as liminal spaces where different realms of existence intersect. The constant movement of tides creates natural rhythms that mirror the cycles of birth, death, and renewal that form the core of most religious traditions. But the site's sacred status may also reflect historical memory preserved in religious tradition. If sophisticated settlements did exist here during the Ice Age, their destruction by rising seas would have created trauma profound enough to echo through countless generations. The mythological accounts of Krishna's divine city might preserve not just spiritual teachings, but actual historical memories transmuted into religious narrative. This interpretation suggests that faith traditions sometimes function as vast collective memories, preserving information about the human past in forms that survive political upheavals, language changes, and cultural transformations. The sacred stories told in temples might be humanity's most durable historical records, encoded in symbolic language that allows them to be transmitted across time periods that would destroy purely factual accounts. The pilgrims who come to Dwarka today participate in this ancient dialogue between memory and faith, adding their own prayers to a conversation that has continued for millennia. Their devotions connect them not just to divinity, but to the entire human past, to ancestors who may have walked these same shores when they extended far into what is now ocean, to builders who constructed monuments that still rest beneath the waves. Dawn breaks over the Arabian Sea like a slow revelation, painting the water in shades of gold and copper that echo the warm stone of the temples rising from modern Dwarka sacred shore. The fishing boats that have sheltered in the harbor through the night begin their gentle procession toward the open ocean, their white sails catching the first breath of the land breeze that will carry them to ancient fishing grounds. 60 feet below their keels, the drowned city keeps its eternal vigil in the blue-green twilight. Schools of silver fish weave between stone blocks that once supported palaces and temples, their movements creating living mandalas that shift and flow with the rhythm of the tides. Coral gardens bloom in the spaces that once echoed with human voices, transforming ancient architecture into submarine temples dedicated to the patient gods of the deep. The sea has taken everything: the golden spires that once pierced the sky, the marble streets where Krishna supposedly walked with his queens, the harbor walls that protected merchant vessels from storms that raged thousands of years ago. Stone by stone, the ocean has claimed its tribute, pulling down monuments to human ambition with the same relentless patience it shows in reshaping coastlines and wearing away mountains. But the sea also gives back in its own mysterious way. It has preserved what time and weather would have long since eroded, protecting organic materials in anaerobic environments where they can survive for millennia. It has created new beauty from ancient destruction, transforming rubble into reefs, ruins into sanctuaries for marine life that brings its own form of worship to these underwater temples. Each tide that flows over the ruins carries with it microscopic offerings, plankton and nutrients that feed the coral gardens, sediments that both bury and preserve artifacts, minerals that slowly transform buried wood into stone while maintaining the memory of its original form. The sea's offerings are as constant as the prayers whispered in the temples above, as patient as the faith that has kept this place sacred through all the centuries of change. The mystery remains, suspended in salt water and ancient stone. Were these ruins the remnants of Krishna's golden city that paradise briefly made manifest on earth? Or do they represent something equally remarkable evidence of human achievement from an age so remote that its civilizations have been erased from every record except the testimony of stones that rest beneath the sea? Perhaps the question itself misses the deeper truth. The sea makes no distinction between myth and history, between divine city and human settlement. It accepts all offerings with equal grace, preserving what it chooses to preserve, revealing what it chooses to reveal. In its vast archives, the prayers of contemporary pilgrims mingle with the dreams of ancient builders, creating a continuity that transcends the boundaries between past and present, sacred and secular, human and divine. As the sun climbs higher, the sea transforms from copper to blue to the deep green of afternoon. The pilgrims begin to arrive at the temples above, their morning prayers joining the ancient conversation between human aspiration and cosmic mystery. Below them, the ruins wait in their watery silence, holding secrets that may never be fully understood, but which continue to inspire. The same wonder that has drawn seekers to this sacred shore for longer than recorded memory can reach. The waves roll in with the same rhythm they have maintained for millions of years, each one carrying both memory and forgetting, destruction and preservation, endings and beginnings. They whisper secrets to the shore that only the sea knows, then retreat to share those secrets with the drowned city that rests in the deep. In this eternal conversation between land and sea, between what was and what is, between memory preserved in stone and faith carried in the heart, Dwarka continues its deepest teaching, that some mysteries are meant not to be solved, but to be lived, experienced, wondered at across the vast expanse of time that connects all human seeking to the patient wisdom of the waters that surround us. If you enjoyed this journey into the depths of mystery and time, consider subscribing to explore more stories where archaeology meets mythology, where science encounters the sacred, and where the boundary between what we know and what we dream continues to shift like the tide itself.